I chose this one because I was really wanting to do something extremely challenging. So something with intense foreshortening, where this hand is like straight coming at you, and then we see that leg coming straight away from the viewer. We have some things that we can use in here, like basic units of measure, but something this complicated, I think, is a good subject for using basic shape analysis. The way that we do this at first, whatever you select, you're going to slide that into your sheet protector, okay? Once I kind of started going with this and I started using basic units of measure, that helped me with the proportion problem, right? So here I've drawn pretty small and I want you to go pretty big, and I want you to go bigger than the drawing itself. You're going to have to figure out how to measure these different elements in here against the other stuff. So what I figured out, and it's one of the first things I want you to do, what I figured out was like the size of her face here, so chin to like hair. When I dropped that here, it was the same distance from here to here, okay? So once I figured that out, I was able to draw one of them and then bring the other into the right proportion, right? Now, things got a little bit more dicey with these small areas, right? So then I had to figure out, okay, if my finger looks pretty good and I go from here to here, that's about the same size here. So then you have to start looking at other basic units of measure, right? Okay. So I'm not going to use this one. I'm going to use a different example. Has anybody ever done anything like this before? Yeah? A lot of the examples I have in here, they're intentionally complex, right? Because I don't want this to be something that you could use some other technique for. So I'm going to use this crazy wasp-looking thing. And I'm going to struggle getting this in here while you're all watching me. So I'm probably going to go landscape on my drawing, just because it makes more sense with the subject that I've selected. So the first thing I'm going to go about doing here is applying some basic shape analysis to my structure, right? Only this time I'm going to use like a really bright pen so I can see it better. So somebody give me a suggestion on this. You're looking at the subject, right? What's a really easy kind of softball here? Like, okay, I would use this shape to describe this part of the insect. Go for it.
Triangle for like the finger.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So I could keep that simple by just making a triangle like this. But because I really want to make sure that I get all of these different segments of the wasp in here, I'm going to start with a basic triangle here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to like work all of these other segments in here individually, right? So I'm going to use a rectangular aspect here, another rectangular aspect here. So I'm kind of like forcing this into a geometric view, right? Okay. So the head, I think it's important for me to say, okay, well, the eye should probably be like an oval. Then I'm going to go ahead and use like a larger oval aspect to get the rest of the head in here. That way I've got some relationship. If I draw this first, I know where to drop this in here, right? So this is pretty complex, so I'm just trying to break some of these down. So I'm going to keep these like little appendages and stuff just rectangular for now, because I can go back later and I can detail. So don't overthink this step, right? You're not tracing everything that you see on there. I want you to attribute basic shape analysis to what you're doing. So this is kind of like a weird shape, but I'm going to go for like an upside down tie looking shape on that. I think I'm just going to go with like another big circle here. And then a really large, whoops. Okay, homeboy. Let's come down here, wasp. I'm just going to go with a large triangle out here, just to keep it simple. Now, if you mess up, just use one of the sanitary wipe things to erase it, right? Let's see, what else should I get on there? I'm just going to add like this little shape here. So I'm going to create kind of like a modified rectangle up in here. As long as I get the main structure right, I can go ahead and add the fancy stuff later. Like, I'm not going to worry about this stuff coming out the face because I can add that later. Let's see. I feel like that's about all I need really to get started. Because one thing that I actually analyze when I'm doing this is the gaps in between too. Because remember, I talked about how like negative space works really well for me. So the little negative space elements that are between these, I often take a look at, evaluate how to lay those down, right? So for this step, I don't want you to look at your subject, right? I want you to look at your basic shape that you've created, okay? For this, I'm gonna go small because I want to make sure I have enough space here to do the nice large one, right? So I'm just gonna kind of give myself a little parameter about right here. If you're somebody that does really well with that whole like crosshair thing, go ahead and do that, that's fine. You can cut this in quarters so that you can take a look at how that lays. I definitely had to do that whenever I was amplifying this to this. So I literally took this, measured it, and put a crosshair on there. Then to figure out how that was gonna work for my paper, I folded it in half and I just creased right here, just barely, so it didn't mess my paper up. Then I was able to take a look at how these things fall within those quadrants, and I was able to get that much larger, right? The grid, I only want you to be using one if you need it, but two for amplification purposes. So I kind of have to think a little bit smaller here. So the first thing I'm gonna probably start with is like this big element in here. And when you do this, sketch out lightly to get started. Trace over some of the stuff that you've already created in here. A lot of times I defer to that whole continuous edge thing. I go back and forth and I take a look at what I'm doing. And don't think that you have to get this all at one shot, right? You can always erase, clean up, modify. But I want you to make sure that your basic shape analysis looks good. Like, it needs to look as close to this as humanly possible. So I might even like measure these, like, you know, this oval is about the same size as this oval. So if I saw that, awesome, that's gonna help me a lot. This one is about half the size of that, and it touches this one only, but not this one. So I'm just gonna drop that one in here about like that. So that looks like it's about half the size. Now I'm gonna go ahead and start getting these rectangular elements in here. Try to get the same pitch on those things. So we're allowing our brain to see shapes rather than thinking so much about the subject. So we are using an analytical thing here. That's why it's called shape analysis, right? So just allow that to happen. Then we're gonna come back and we're gonna use visual spatial to make sure it looks right. And I may be getting some of these wrong just from the angle that I'm drawing here, so I will go back and take a look at that later. Okay, looks like I need to get this one a lot longer. This is gonna go back a little bit like this. And this pulls down. So another thing I might do is think about latitude lines, right? If I were gonna draw a latitude line perfectly across here, I would need to see that that has to go beyond it, and then this goes beyond it quite a bit more. So that's another thing that you can use to help you. Okay, looks like this one almost kind of joins with that one. Again, resist that temptation to go back to your source image because you'll probably want to make things too complex. Okay, now for the stinger thingy. Now I can see that I think I made this a little bit too long. Either that or this needs to get bigger, I'm not sure. I'll have to mess with that a little bit later. So this would be a good area for me to analyze negative space too. So like if I'm not sure if I have the right pitch on this, I'm gonna look at this shape and go, okay, well, what do I have going on here? Maybe I need to cut this more this way, because you probably see that discrepancy like I do. Or maybe it's not coming up enough. So whatever modifications you need to make for this, right? Okay. So then it's important to get back from your stuff as you're working, because looking from one side to the other, you're gonna start to see the areas where you might have messed up or where you had some problematic stuff happening. I think I made this a little too big, so I'm gonna skinny it up. Now when you do this, again, I want you to clean it up. I want this to look like this, okay? Very clean line work. Okay. All right, so now I'm ready to go ahead and get that in a larger sense. Abandon this at this point and to work from this and this, right? So what I'm gonna do is kind of create a proportional thing to help me with this. I mean, one way I could do this is go, okay, well, if this is my basic unit of measure, if I just make that double size here, everything will amplify twice. But this is another nice way to handle this by creating a grid on here. So it's about halfway. That looks like it's about halfway there. So now what I can do is literally take my paper and I just want to crease a little bit there so that I have a good mark that's going to show me where I can create a line on there, right? Don't crease it all the way. Okay, so I can take this and I can just create a very light line across. I can take this and create a very light line up and down. So now what I do is I take a look at my image up here. Like where do all these elements fall within those quadrants? Since I like to start with this, my basic unit of measure. See, I think I put that about halfway there. It looks like it's going to be kind of up and in this region here. So I'm going to go ahead and just sketch that out bigger like this. So if I'm using that size for that, then I need to start looking at how all the other sizes coordinate with that. Remember that the size that I had here was the same. So all I've really got to do now at this point is get something that's roughly the same size. Then I'm going to start moving, basically using the same scenario that I had up in here to go across. So since I started there, and I came here, now I'm going to go ahead and give that some proximity as well. And it looks like this is pretty close to this area, so that's working out pretty well for me. So it gets a little bit more difficult when I'm looking at these smaller pieces. So what I might do is like literally measure the length of this leg and see how much of that encompasses, say, the head. And I'm seeing the length of this leg to this little area here. So this to this is about this to this. So I'm going to go like, okay, that's about where that should be going. So that looks like I need to break that up a little bit more. Don't draw as heavily as I did there. You want to draw light enough that you can actually erase this off and create a good drawing out of it. And remember, I didn't put everything in this, right? So as long as I have enough information on here that when I access my drawing, I can start to work other stuff off of it, then I'll be in good shape for that. Okay, so now I've got this area coming down from that. Looks like that's about right on. It's about right on that thing, on that line. Break that. Eventually, you're going to get the hang of this to where your proportions start to fall into place, especially with enough practice. Probably one of the more difficult things about this is doing the amplification, trying to get your stuff to look bigger and proportionally appropriate. So remember when I told you my number one goal for you in this class was to make it to where you have the confidence to draw anything you want, right? I mean, that's it. It's really simple, okay? I never want you to feel like, oh, I can't approach such a difficult subject because I have this beautiful concept that I want to realize, but it's too hard for me to do. That's what all these techniques are about. That's why I'm choosing extremely challenging subject matter so that you can try this stuff out. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and drop this boy in here. And I may have to make that bigger later. I don't know. I'll have to look at my drawing or my reference image. Get a good feel for that. So be loose at this point, right? Because we can tighten up later. Okay. So this other leg is kind of challenging, but I'm going to go for it. Get that in there. Kind of want to avoid that and just like jump straight to the image, but I feel like I need to. That's almost straight down. So when you're drawing, it's so important to stand up when you're doing this because we're changing proportion in a lot of ways here, right? You're drawing it small, then you're going to draw it big. At this point, you would take your reference image. And now you're going to start working with that, right? Because we have enough information on here that we can fill in the other details, we can get textures, we can start to shade, right? When you do this, I would use like a 2B pencil. That way it's easier to erase, right? Cool. So questions for me about how we do this?